Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Commander Clash podcast, where the Commander Clash crew, minus Richard this week, who's out traveling, discusses Commander-related topics, and we have a fun one. Well, I don't know about fun, but a good one. Let's go with good one this week. We are talking about the best counter spells in all of the Commander format. So, we did a tier list where we ranked a bunch of them, and we distilled that down into a top 10 list. So we're going to count down the top 10 counter spells in Commander. And then after the top 10 list, at the end of the cast, we want to shout out some of our honorable mentions, some of our favorite counter spells maybe, or sleeper counter spells that didn't quite make the top 10 list. So that's the plan for today. Before we get into it, though, we got a couple of co-hosts to introduce, starting with Budget Commander Tomer. How are you this week, Tomer?
I'm doing well. I'm always excited to discuss and argue about Magic cards. So
yeah,
that's gonna be super fun.
It's always a good time. And we also have Counterspell expert Krim, and we need you for this cast, Krim. You know more about counters than anyone else on the cast, I think.
Thank you for having me. I'm fresh back from Fanime, so I'm pretty excited. Yeah, it was a fun anime convention. That was so fun. I screamed a lot and lost my voice.
That sounds like a blast. So before we jump into our list, a reminder that our show today is brought to you by Card Conduit. And Card Conduit, they are the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. And if you ever get tired of all the hassles that go into buy listing your cards, Card Conduit lets you skip them with their curated service. You can send in as many cards as you want with a buy list value of $1 or more and pay a 5% service fee. And if you want to do a bit of work, you can use their sorted service where you list and sort your cards in advance and pay just a 2% fee. And no matter which option you choose, you're going to get a detailed report with the results and a fast payment once the order is processed. And you can even get another 10% off if you head over to cardconduit.com/mtggoldfish. Card Conduit, they're the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. And if you want another way to support the show, you can head on over to mtggoldfishmerch.com. We got tokens and playmats and t-shirts and all kinds of cool stuff. So head on over there as well. Anyway, let's count down the top 10 counter spells in Commander. And Tomer, why don't you kick us off with number 10 on our list? What comes in at number 10?
All right, number 10 is still very powerful. It's a force spell, Force of Negation, 1 blue, instant, like all counter magic actually. If it's not your turn, you may exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay the spell's mana cost. You can either pay 3 mana or 0 mana by exiling a blue card. And you get to counter target non-creature spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. For our ratings, we gave it... I found it. I gave it a C, Seth gave it a B, and Krim gave it a B. So, also our rating, by the way, we go from D, which is like have a specific reason. We generally don't run these cards. C is average. It could be like a mediocre filler card or a budget choice. B is good in only a small percentage of decks. A is really good overall, good in a large percentage of decks. And S is like an auto-include staple. You power down decks by not running it. So we put this as like an overall, a B overall.
Yeah,
B minus.
Everything on our list, I think, is going to be B or higher because the bad ones didn't make the top 10 list. Yeah. Force of Negation, it's the worst of the playable free counter spells, right? Like, when you think about the free counter spells, there's really 3 I would consider playable, which is Force of Will, Fierce Guardianship, Force of Negation. Force of Negation is the most restricted of the bunch and also has arguably the highest cost. Like, it's similar to Fierce Guardianship, except you also have to exile a card from your hand, which is a pretty big cost if you want to cast it for free. So I think it's a good card. It's pretty good at stopping combos, I guess would be its like primary use. Plus it's a negate effect, so it only hits non-creature spells, so it's not going to stop your opponent's commander or something that Force of Will would do. So I think Force of Negation, it's fine, but I don't know. It's not really staple level for me. What about you, Krim? How often do you run Force of Will? What do you think about this one?
I really don't run Force of Negation all that much because the exact reason you just mentioned. I have to go down a card, and it's also not CDH, so I don't think I necessarily need this. Like, in a format where, like, CDH, I need as many free spells as possible, along with negates being just generally pretty good in CDH, I think that this is a way, like, just way too high of a cost for what it does in casual. And I mean that in like how much it costs literally and because of the exiling itself. So, yeah, I don't know. This is definitely not in every list. This is in casual. I'm playing these in like what? Maybe my Dragon Lord Ojutai, like a Voltron deck where I literally have one creature and I need to always be ready to like protect my creature. And obviously this is more of another thing that is a very real thing that people don't seem to think about with this is because it's automatically a free spell, but it has to be not on your turn. And that's the problem, right? So like even that it's not a great protection spell unless it's like, your opponent's doing something on their turn. So if they save a swords or plowshares or something like that and you're attacking, you have to pay for it. So because this is on your not on your turn, it's a pretty big drawback. It's just okay in casual and in very niche decks.
Yeah, it's kind of intentionally designed to not be good at protecting your own stuff. Like it's designed to be good at stopping your opponent's like broken stuff, but not really to protect your broken stuff. But sorry, Tomura, go ahead.
Well, it's far more fair, I guess. Yeah. It's like I totally agree with both of you. Like I don't run this card much. I put it as a C. I would, if we're just talking CDH, I'd put this as an A because just free interaction is so clutch. Like if somebody's casting a Nauseam or something or an Underworld Breach, you just need to stop it or else you lose the game. So if I'm in a blue heavy deck that is CDH, like my Niv Perun deck, I'm going to jam this card without thinking about it. But outside of that, I almost never run this card. You have to exile a blue card from your hand, so you have to be very focused on blue. You have to be either mono blue or two color. So that already cuts down a lot of the decks that it could feature a home in. It doesn't protect any of your crucial turns, because if you're like trying to combo off or just trying to resolve a really important spell, you're going to have to pay 3 mana, which is a really bad rate for a counter magic. As Krim said too, like if somebody has like a Swords of Plowshares for an important card that you want to protect, generally speaking, they're not going to cast swords on their turn. They're going to cast it on your turn if you like after you choose who you're going to be attacking, for example. So it's not very good protection on your own things. It stops your opponent's broken things very well. It even exiles the card, which is very important. But I think this is like a CDH card where it really shines. And outside of that, in casual, there's a handful of decks that I would run it. Like Elegith, for example, draws so many cards in mono blue that sure, I'll run this card just because it's so easy for me to pitch extra blue cards because the deck draws so many cards. Or like a Zami, for example, I would consider this. But outside of that,
I'm glad you mentioned the CDH thing, because it is worth reminding people that we're mostly ranking these based on our play level, which is like reasonably powered casual, I guess, because there's some other spells on here that didn't make our list. Any of the like red elemental blast, blue elemental blast, mental missteps, those are cards that in a CDH power level are all stars that you're going to see a lot, but at our power level they just don't really show up as much. So if something you see a lot in CDH doesn't make our list, it's probably just because we're kind of grading them based on more casual play level.
There's also going to be like a couple cards on our list that we value very highly in casual, but like a CDH player is going to be frothing at the mouth. I mean, like, how dare you put this in the top 10? It's just casual expectations.
The good news is, number 9 on our list is a card that I think is good in CDH and in casual. And Krim, you're especially high on this one. So what is number 9 on our counterspell list?
I think in blue and white, you play Dovin's Veto. The card is Dovin's Veto. It's just Azorius, can't be countered, and it's a negate. I think that this is just one of like the best counterspells you can have in a counter battle, like in a counter war, right? Like you can bait out all the counters from your opponent, let those resolve, and then now use Dovin's Veto on the actual threat you were trying to counter. Or you could just straight up use this on the thing you want to counter. If you don't want to try to drop more counterspells, just flat out no. The only way they can deal with this is if they bounce it off the stack.
I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, like if it's a battle of blue mages, anytime I see that says something that can't be countered, that's already very good.
Being uncounterable is definitely huge for our rankings. I think Krim was highest; he had an A. Tomer was in the middle with a B. I was actually at the low end with a C. Yeah. But Tomer, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What do you think about this one?
No, I just had to remark that, like, I love the Crim respects the other Crim players at the table so much.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, he's like ready. He's ready for the Crim mirrors.
Yeah, you gotta be ready for the Crim meta, you know?
Yeah,
the one thing about it's the curse of playing my decks and my play style is that you now also have to factor in people that will also match that energy.
Yeah.
So, which is fun. It's fun, right? Like there's an element of like, oh, well, we're going to have this mind battle. Do you have it? Well, I do, but you can't say no to it because this card is uncounterable. And that's why I love it.
It takes a Crim to beat a Crim, as they say.
Exactly.
I have a question for both of you, though. So I think Dovin's Veto is the best negate because it's uncounterable, assuming you're in the colors. Do you like negates in Commander? I know one thing I don't play nearly as many counters as like Crim does. So I have noticed when I put counters in my deck, they pretty much all can counter anything. And if something only says non-creature spell, I actually drop it down quite a bit in my rankings, not because it's bad. Like I said, I think if you only want to counter non-creature spells, Veto is one of the best options. But if I'm only playing like 2 or 3 counters in my deck, I really want them all to be flexible enough to stop whatever I want to stop. How do you guys value negates and counters that can't hit anything in Commander?
I mean, negates, like if it's just flat out negate, it's pretty funny because like I have flat out just negate at D, unplayable. Right? But like that's because the fact here is I'm going to play negate. I want my negates to either A, be free or not interactable. Like there has to be a reason why I'm playing this negate, right? And in casual, there are just enough things that where you can negate. And though this is like, I have it listed as an A, it's anywhere between an A and a high B, low A, high B, because I really like this in a deck where, example, my Ojutai deck that revolves around just Ojutai, right? Or maybe my, like, if I'm playing Spirits and I want to just be able to counter a board wipe or something like that and not have anybody back it up. No, you can't Swan Song it back. You can't do anything. There's just something that there's a lot of power just within the ability to not be able to counter it, which is huge. And negates themselves, it's not like there's no shortage of things to hit. If you rely on your threats and your creatures, obviously things like Farewell, big sweepers like an Ondu Inversion, or maybe spot removal, whatever it is, the point here is that this is good for that. And it's cheap, right? If this were like 3 mana, that'd be really bad. But like because it's cheap, this is why I like it.
What do you think, Tomer? How do you value negates?
So I actually run a decent amount of negate effects. I run negate itself because it's like 15 cents, so I run it in a couple budget brews as just like the 3rd or 4th best counter spell in the deck. But I'm not super high on Dovin's Veto because I guess maybe my metas are a little bit different from Crim's. I mean, outside of Commander Clash, obviously, I don't run against that many counter magics, so I don't value the can't be countered as highly as Crim does. And so I generally aim for my negates cost 1 mana. There's a bunch of 1 mana negates, Swan Song, Spell Pierce even, that I actually would run more than this, an offer you can't refuse. But this is it's a fine counter magic, and if you are in a meta that has a lot of counter magic, then this is an excellent way of making sure that the thing that you don't want to resolve doesn't resolve. So I like it there, but I think it's a little bit more meta-specific, and it really depends on what you're playing against.
I guess that's true. Like, if there's no counters in your meta, it's kind of just a harder to cast negate. Like, if the can't be countered spell is never going to matter in your play group, then it's actually not really much different than negate. So I guess it really does depend. On the other hand, in Commander Clash, when Crim's at the table every week, having a counter that's not going to get countered actually has a lot of value. But you mentioned 1 mana negate effects, Homer. That's a good segue, because number 8 on our list, we have a 1 mana negate in Swan Song. Swan Song, 1 blue mana, counter target instant, sorcery, or enchantment spell, and the controller of that spell gets a 2/2 bird creature token with flying. So Swan Song, rating wise, Tomer has an A, backing up his I like 1 mana negates statement. I have it as a B. Crim, a counter you don't really like that much. You're low man on this one, coming in at a C. So why don't you guys battle this one out? Tomer has it an A, Krim has it as a C. Fight. Ding, 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 ding. Round starts. Go.
This hits enchantment, instant, and sorcery, right? Like, so, like, it's negate actually has more applications.
Doesn't get planeswalkers or artifacts.
Yeah. It doesn't hit planeswalker artifacts.
Or battles.
Battles, things like that, right? Like, that, okay, artifacts are so common in Commander that I would almost rather have a Spell Pierce. And I do like the hard counter. That part is nice. Like the bird is not even the drawback to me. It's the fact that it leaves out like the one of the biggest things in Commander is that artifacts and of course, whatever else, but like mostly just artifacts. At that point, that's pretty concerning to me. However, for one more mana, I could just counter a non-creature spell. Not to say that Swan Song is bad because the mana efficiency is really nice. Commander also has a lot of enchantments. Countering instant or sorcery, though, like there's tons of ways to do that. Although this is hard because I love the mana efficiency of this, but I hate what it misses.
So I'm much higher on it because I really like mana efficiency because even if you're not in draw go, like having some counter magic accessible to you, even if you're in more of a tap out deck, is really important. And every single mana counts. Like free spells are obviously the easiest to cast, but then 1 mana is way easier to cast than 2 mana, and 2 mana is way easier to cast than 3 mana than if you're not draw go. So I like it as 1 mana. And I mostly view like counter magic. The main priority is to hit instants and sorceries because those aren't permanents and they can't be interacted with my other removal any other way. Like if somebody plays an artifact, I'll still hopefully have artifact destruction in my deck. Even in blue has like ways like Raven form and stuff like that to interact with artifacts. So when permanents are on the battlefield, my deck will still have permanent removal, but instant and sorceries are unique in that you can only interact with them in counter magic. So when I'm looking at counter magic, I look for cheap and it has to hit instants and sorceries because those are the things that I'm most afraid of. Board wipes, targeted removal to my most important permanent, mostly as a protection measure, and stuff that otherwise would win the game that I wouldn't be able to remove with my removal spells. So that's why I really like Swan Song so much. It's 1 mana and it deals with instants and sorceries, which is my main concern.
Yeah, I think I'm mostly on Tomer's side. Like, yeah, it is true that it doesn't hit everything that a negate would hit, but I have also found for me, like, stopping the counter, or stopping the wrath is one of the biggest things, like, a lot of decks are looking for. The instants and sorceries, needing to counter an artifact, it does come up, but I don't think it's, like, that important to me because a lot of artifacts are mana rocks and whatnot, and I just don't really care about countering them. So I like Swan Song quite a bit. I think it might be the best 1 mana counter in casual. Like any of the other, you mentioned an Offer You Can't Refuse, which is similar except it gives 2 treasures instead of a bird. There's Flusterstorm, which has storm but only hits instants and sorceries. So and it's pay 1, or you have to pay 1 for each copy of it, or you can fizzle it. Spell Pierce, I actually don't really like because you can pay 2 to get around it, and in the late game, a lot of decks are going to cast the Wrath and have the 2 mana to pay. Like, is this the number 1 mana counter spell for our level of play?
I actually think an Offer You Can't Refuse is better.
Ooh, so the 2 treasures is less of a drawback than the bird, you think?
Yeah. Well, to me, it's not even the bird. I don't care about the bird.
Flexibility of hitting any non-creature?
Yeah. In the current year, everything being so potent, I do care that it leaves off artifacts. And the one thing that's the most broken in Commander, as you heard my philosophy from the School of Krim, artifact decks are always, like, if there is an artifact deck, they're going to be the most busted thing at the table. So I am not going to let that slide, right? Like an artifact deck, like I can't. I want stuff that is flexible, and it just leaving artifact is big enough for me.
I don't like giving people treasures. The treasure's a big down. That's like giving someone a dockside almost for free.
Yeah, but I'm not just firing off an Offer You Can't Refuse on your like signet, right? Like I'm firing it off on either one of the big like game winners for you because that's a game winner. I respect that. So like, yeah, I can counter that with an Offer You Can't Refuse. Can't do that with Swan Song. So I don't know. I think in the current year, with so many things just being powerful, you just, if you're playing a deck that cares about if you're playing Draw Go, there's just stuff you can't let resolve, and there's so much stuff. So the net that I want to have, that I can catch stuff with, it needs to be pretty wide. Non-creature already on its own means that it is narrow, right? It is already narrow to me. Anything, and then once you take that, and then once you turn it into only instant sorcery enchantment, that's even more narrow. So I need to make sure that, I want to be able to hit everything, and then once we get past that, then we start looking at the non-creature counters, right? And that's where I start looking at, Fierce Guardianship, Force Negations, and stuff like that. So, an Offer You Can't Refuse, probably the best 1-mana counterspell, because it hits everything that a 1-mana counterspell can hit.
What do you think, Tomer? What's the best 1-mana counterspell for you?
Swan Song.
I'm
just not that. I don't know. When I think of artifact decks, it seems like a cascading effect usually. There's a lot of small artifacts, and together they work together to be a really strong workhorse engine. I don't generally think about these must respond artifacts, except for a handful, Bowls of Citadel. You must respond to it. Aetherflux Reservoir, you don't have a chance to remove it because they're going to just cast Aetherflux Reservoir and then activate it usually. Unless they actually have to play it early to gain that life. Actually, they do have to usually do that. They usually have to cast some stuff with Aetherflux Reservoir, gain a life, and do it, so you can still interact with it. But yeah, I don't know. It's usually when I value the instant sorceries. Yeah, giving treasures is I think worse than giving a bird. But it's not end of the day. If I give you 2 treasures and stop this the worst spell that I didn't want you to resolve, I think that's a very good trade, and I'll take it every time. Because you're up a little bit on mana, but what are you going to do? Cast the second worst thing? Okay, fine. I'm happy with that, because at least I got rid of your worst thing. So I think they're very close. I think Offer You Can't Be Refused is kind of underutilized, honestly. You give it a D if we're going to be talking about it right now. You give it a D, so you're not a fan of it at all.
I really don't there's so many other options that, for me, it's just not worth giving someone 2 treasures. I'm not intimidated at all by a 2-turn bird. It's like a beast, but we're playing Commander, you got 40 life. A random 2/2 or 3/3 is very unlikely to actually swing the game. On the other hand, 2 mana, that's, I think, pretty powerful. Krim is afraid of artifact decks. I'm afraid of treasures. I've just seen the mana of treasures do so many busted things that I refuse to play an Offer You Can't Refuse. So apparently you can refuse it, despite what the card name would have you believe, because I just won't put it in my decks. I'll play something else instead.
So 2 treasures, that's too much. I refuse that.
Yeah.
But then, will you pay the 1? You're no, I refuse. Because you could just have all the cards. But 2 treasures.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
The world of Seth.
Don't try to make sense of it, Tomer. Don't try. We've been debating. It can't counter an artifact. It can't counter an enchantment, whatever. Let's move on to number 7 on our list. A counter that can get rid of anything for 0 mana, if you're willing to pay the price in life in a card. Tomer, what do we have at number 7?
Okay, Force of Will. This is All-Star, a multi-format All-Star. 3 and double blue, so 5 mana total. To counter target spell, or you can cast it for free by exiling a blue card from your hand and losing 1 life, paying 1 life. So it counters everything, and unlike Force of Negation, it can counter creatures, and you can use it on your own turn. So if you have a game-winning turn that you really need nobody to stop your Crater Hoof, or resolving a spell that really must resolve, or somebody swordsing your Voltron commander on a lethal swing or something like that, this can do all that. But at the same time, it is a heavy cost. You're 2-for-1ing yourself at the very least. You have to be heavy blue, or else you won't have. It will be very inconsistent to find another blue card to pitch. But if you can check those boxes, if you're okay with going down a card and you're heavily in blue and you really need to have that free interaction, I think Force of Will is the best in terms of
Tomer, you just
second best.
Disregarded the loss of 1 life.
Well, life is a resource. Unless you're in a tournament, and then you might lose to life totals. But But yeah, I think this is good. Like, it's no fierce, but it's the second best, I think. I don't run it very often, but like if I'm heavy blue and I'm in a deck that draws a lot of cards, heck yeah. And again, my CDH deck obviously runs it too.
I think its value is also dependent on what your deck is trying to do. Like, if you have really important things you need to resolve, I think it goes up a lot in value. When if you're playing a richer deck that's a bunch of fledgling Ospreys and all your cards are essentially the same, like, it's not worth 2 for 1ing yourself. But if you can, if I resolve the Bolas's Citadel, I win the game. If I resolve this Craterhoof, I win the game. I think that's where Force is arguably the best. You don't need to have your commander on the battlefield like Fierce Guardianship. There's no restriction to keep you from doing it during your turn like Force of Negation. You don't have to have mana up like Swan Song or a lot of these other counter spells. So I am the highest on this. I have it as an A. The rest of you have it as a B. I think the only downside is you don't have to have a lot of blue cards because 5 mana is really a lot. Like, even unlike Force of Negation, like 3 mana is a lot to pay for a negate. 5 mana is just an absurd amount to pay for a counter spell if you are not free casting this. So you really got to make sure you can free cast it when you need to. But Krim, what do you think about Force?
Surprisingly, I gave it a B, and that's just because I don't like going down a card. I think in casual, in Commander, when you are fighting 3 other people, one of the hardest things you can do, and you're already the blue player, and especially when you're assumed to have like counter magic, and if you even look remotely like a control deck, people are going to be forcing you to use your cards, right? And if that's the case, you can also be going down a card. That's why, like Tomer had mentioned, I think this is a very good card in a specific deck. I think it's better in like, a mono blue deck or anything that, like an Azami or a deck that just literally is drowning in cards all the time. I think that's fine, but it needs to be a mono blue deck. Otherwise, I don't know. I mean, I think I definitely like this more than Force of Negation by a lot, but it's just I don't like going down cards. It's amazing once you get to like CDH and stuff, obviously, but like it is just a bit of a thing I just don't like. I just don't like going down cards. It's also why you don't see me playing a lot of Force of Negation either. It's only in specific decks.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, when you're using this for a fair purpose and having to go down a card, it's pretty brutal. When you're stopping someone from winning the game, then it's worth it. But if you're not countering something on that level, then it definitely is painful to have to spend 2 cards to stop a card.
Exactly. This is good in a deck where, like you had mentioned, you need to push through your win con, right? But I don't know, for like casual Commander, I don't think that I need necessarily have a free counterspell. I can just do that. I think there's just a better way to go about it, because in casual Commander, there's no must resolve threat, because you're just trying to outlast, and you don't outlast if you go down cards.
Well, let's move on to the most surprising card, I think, on our entire list. If we're going to get yelled at in the comments, this is going to be the card that does it. Krim! we have a bit of an MDFC at number 6. What do we got?
So, ranking it at B is Tomer, Seth at A, and I've also got it at an A, is a Jwari Disruption.
Yeah.
Okay, we just talked a lot about things being... Technically, this hits everything. All right? So that hits that check mark. It's cheap. But most importantly, what does it do? It's also a land. So I think that, for those that don't know, Jwari Disruption is just counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. And then on the backside, it enters as a tapped blue land.
And it costs 1 and a blue, so 2 mana.
Yeah. That's good enough, because this is the counter spell that I actually think... What is the downside? You get a land, or you get a force spike. And I've gotten tons of people with this as like in my rogues deck. I literally got somebody with it over the weekend. So like this is such a fun card, and it's pretty much free. I don't see why you wouldn't play it. It's not like the best counterspell ever. It's not a hard counterspell, but the amount of times people that won't play around the one, and when it starts getting to the point where someone does, let's play it as a land.
For me, I play this in essentially every deck up to 3 colors, I want to say. Definitely every mono blue in 2 color decks. Once I get to like 4 or 5 colors, I just don't know if I can afford it as a land, so I'm less likely to play it. Like, it's tapped, it only makes 1 color. But I think it's actually just a really good card. As you said, it goes into one of your land slots, so either it is letting you cut a land or adding an extra land to your deck. Both of those are really powerful in Commander. And you get some bonus, like, psychological damage. Like, getting someone with a Force Spike is like, oh, it is the best, because a person knows it's so incredibly easy to play around. Like, you only gotta pay a single mana. So if you get got by it, it's way more like, if you got by a Force of Will or whatever, what can I do? Like, there's nothing I can do. But when you get got by a Jwari Disruption, you're like, oh no, like, I could have avoided this and I didn't. Yeah, so I guess I deserve it, and I just love that aspect of it. What do you think, Tomer? You're the lowest on it. How often do you play it?
I say it's the lowest, but it's also like my favorite. It is my favorite counterspell on this entire list. Like, I jam it, and it's the one I run almost the most too. Like that, and number 3 on our list that we'll get to eventually. This card makes it in basically all my monocolor and 2-color decks. It looks kind of jank because like, yeah, it is really easy to play around, but also it scales, its power scales, drops down like in the midpoint of the game to the end point where people are just going to have too much mana. But I will basically, like, if I don't need to curve out with like a untapped land, I'm just going to jam Jwari Disruption onto the battlefield, and I don't really care too much. Like, if I need to curve out, I'll just play an if I don't need to curve out, I just put this as a tap land and whatever. But like, just having it in my deck, especially if like later on in the game where it's not as powerful, but like I don't need the extra lane drop, I could just hold on to it, and sometimes I'll get you on it. Like, it's just a good card. It's just like, it's never been disappointing in my hand. Like, yeah, okay, it's disappointing that you don't get to counter something, but like, it's always going to be either a lane drop or a counterspell. And like, the flexibility here just makes it so nice and just pleasant to put into all my decks. Like, it easily lets me hit my 38 to 40 land count that I like aiming for most of my decks, and not feel like I'm getting flooded too easily with it. And I don't know, I'm just happy. It's a cool card. Is it the strongest? No, but I run it so much, and it overperforms. Honestly, it overperforms.
It does. It overperforms because it's never dead.
It's really never dead. Yeah.
I have a related question. You have 20 mana. You got a Genesis Wave, a Torment of Hailfire. Your opponent has a couple of mana up. Are you going all 20, or do you leave a mana up because of effects like this? Like, is it correct to go 1 less because of Jwari Disruption or Mana Tithe? Like,
I personally don't, just because in the wild, I don't see Jwari Disruption that much. I think we as a group love it way more. So like, if I'm playing on Commander Clash and I see like somebody has a blue and a colorless up, yes, I will play around it. But like, out in the wild, no, not really. And if I get got by it too, like, that's just a cool moment, right? Like, I think it supplies a good story to the game if somebody gets got by Jwari Disruption. If it was like a game-winning spell, and I've done it before, and it feels so good. It feels so good.
Yeah. The huge, 20-minute Torment of Hailfire, and you get them. It is like one of the best feelings in all of Magic. But let's keep moving on to number 5 on our list. We have a counter that is kind of specifically good for the Commander format in Tail's End. So Tail's End, it is 2 mana, 1 in a blue. It's an instant, of course, and it says counter target activated ability, triggered ability, or legendary spell. So that last one is really the big one. Commander is a format built around legends. You got a legend in your command zone, so this is 2 mana counter a commander. And plus, we've talked a lot lately about how so many legends are being printed, so this actually hits a lot of creatures these days and non-creature legends. Rating wise, we got a 2 A's from Crib and Tomer. I have it as a B. I think it's fine. I don't play it that much myself personally because I don't put that much value in the stifle effects. Like, the counter target activated or triggered ability, we always talk about it, but I can count on one hand the number of times, maybe even less than one hand, maybe one finger, the number of times I've actually seen a game of Commander where stifling something was relevant. Like, yes, you can get someone's fetch land and just, like, anger them. That is something that you could do pretty consistently. But outside of just, like, angering the fetch land guy, how valuable is this stifle effect? Like, is this just counter a legend, or like y'all have it rated today? Like, how often are you stifling something with a Tails End, or is it just counter a legendary spell?
I mean, the thing that's nice about it is that it's doing something even after it resolves, right? The spell, like, let's say I draw this after you've casted your commander. Well, there's a strong chance that
got your fetch land.
You could shut off an activation, and that's pretty big, right? Like, and then of course it countering like everything Wizards makes this like, is now like legendary, right? Every creature's legendary, so every year that goes by, this card just gets better and better and becomes less narrow. However, I know I have it at an A. I surprisingly never find the room for this card, because there's so many efficient counterspells, and I'd rather, like, already assuming that I have Dovin's Veto, right? Like, if I have Dovin's Veto, I've got these negate effects. This is technically even more narrow than a veto, right? Because it only hits legendaries and stifles. So that's kind of, it's weird. I actually think I should put this in a B. It always sounds great when you talk about it. And then when you actually play it, it only counters a commander, and it is actually significantly more narrow than anything else that like Dry Disruption hits everything. Just saying. But yeah, like, I don't know. Maybe actually this is going to go down to a B for me, because this is in a very specific deck and like in a mono blue deck. Maybe like those are the decks where I want this card in.
So I break my rule of counter magic with this one, because like I said, I highly value counter magic that's cheap and targets instants and sorceries. And this one is like mid price, because it's 2 mana instead of 1 or free, and it doesn't hit instants and sorceries. So why do I like it? I like it because I think I've gotten so much use out of it, and maybe I run it more because I'm more of a budget guy, and this is like $1.50 right now. But like, there are so many legendary spells. Even Aftermath, for example, 50 cards, 21 of them were legendary creatures. So just being able to hit everybody's commander is good, but then everybody's 99 is slowly but surely being upgraded with more and more legendary cards. It's not just legendary creatures, it's just like important legendary artifacts like Balls of Citadel or whatever, that it suddenly becomes really good targets. Everything's slowly becoming more and more legendary. And I have gotten a lot of use out of the stifle effect. So the most recent example was somebody Aether Fluxed me for lethal, and I stifled it. Easy peasy. I lost recently on Commander Clash, the latest episode, which was Marionette Master, because a target opponent loses X amount of life whenever an artifact goes to the battlefield, goes into the graveyard. I could have, like, if I had Steel's End, I could have stifled that and lived as well. I think the stifle, like, yeah, it's cute to stop somebody's fetch land and stuff. That's generally not the right call. But I think this card, like Krim said, as Wizards of the Coast leans harder and harder onto Commander, and every single year we're always like, there's no way they could go even harder on Commander, but then every single year they do. By this point where like 80% of all creatures and all artifacts and all enchantments and stuff are all going to be legendary, this card is just going to be like a straight up, just like a 2-mana counter spell with a stifle attached to it. Like, just give it another year, especially if they bring back like legendary instants and sorceries. Like they did that in Dominaria. There's a handful that like see play in legendary decks. It's only a matter of time they're going to bring that back. And as soon as they bring more staples that are legendary instants and sorceries, like board wipes and whatnot, like this card, the stocks just keep going up. So this is like a card, like maybe it's too narrow right now, but like pick up a copy just because it's just going to keep going better. I think this card is like the card that's going to see more and more play as the format continues to grow.
I definitely agree that this card just keeps getting better. Like, that's for sure. There's the Lord of the Rings set is in spoiler season, and Mark Rosewater did his teaser, and even just that, like, just reading the teaser, it's so much about legends. Like, there's a decent sized legendary matters theme. 5 different card types get the legendary super type. If they start adding the super type to like even more, like making more things legends, the better this card gets. So I certainly agree it gets better. I don't buy the stifle logic that much. Like, so many times the thing that you get with the stifle is something that if you had an actual counter spell, you would have just stopped the Aetherflux Reservoir from actually resolving instead of trying to stop the trigger for one turn or whatever. So I feel like a lot of the times when people think they're getting value out of Stifle, it's actually like just worse than if they played a real counter spell. But countering a legend is pretty good these days and keeps getting better. So
I beseech you, Seth, to play Tails End a little bit more, because you love Jwari Deception for the same reason that I do, because there's nothing better than getting somebody with it. I swear to you, there's nothing better than stifling somebody's like critical must-win thing. Like somebody docksides and you just stifle it. Oh,
the problem is
oracles and you stifle it, and they're like, "Oh well, my library is like, so I guess I lose."
The problem is I know I'm not going to be able to resist just firing it off on the first fetch land when I got my mana up, just to do it. Like, there's no way I'm holding it for the Thassa's Oracle. I'm just like, boom, like sinkhole you, go.
Maybe that's why you don't value a Stifle. Like I do think a Stifle is definitely respectable. Like, and I think worth it. Like, but that's where I start looking at things like Nimble Obstructionist. But, like, I don't know. Maybe like, yeah, I don't know. I kind of agree with Seth, though. Like, there's a reason why this just doesn't ever make my final lists. Because it's always, all right, well, I drop it and I just play something else. I play a better counterspell. I play one that counters anything. Or I play a removal spell. So, maybe, I don't know. I think this is like a B. A very specific style of deck. Or if your deck is like a Stifle-themed deck. But A, I was a bit ambitious there. So that one's going back down to B for me.
I could see it as a B.
What's
might
the
go
best
down
Stifle commander? A Stifle.
Yeah,
now I'm trying to
Stifle
imagine what a Stifle-themed deck would be. Now I kind of want to build that. Just all the
Yeah, like-
Stifles and just like fire them off on any
There's
possible
like
trigger
Void
ability.
Husher or something, the ETB, like a flash ETB Stifle, so then it can go back to your hand whenever you cast a spell.
Yes.
Oh, the mage?
It's like a
yeah,
Husher.
Void Mage,
I
Husk
forget.
Mage, something, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Hush-
anyway,
Hush-
that's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whenever you play a spell,
I
you may
mean, the
return
best
it to its
commander
hand.
would be
That's what it is.
Venser, right? Like,
Yeah.
it would be Venser. It'd
Yeah.
have to be
Oh,
Venser.
that sounds so obnoxious to play against. But let's move on to number 4 on our list. We have, our only non-blue counter spell on the list, and I'm kind of excited. It's Tomer's turn. Tomer, I assume that you are a big fan of this card. What are we talking about at number 4?
We're adding a little bit of red chaos to the mix, but a little bit in little amounts with Tybalt's Trickery. This is 1 and a red, so 2 mana. It says counter target spell. Then you choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. Usually somebody like rolls a dice or something. Its controller mills that many cards, then exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card with a different name than that spell. They may cast that card without paying its mana cost, then they put the exile cards on the bottom of their library in a random order. So this is a hard counter spell in red, which is incredibly unique. It's like one of the very few examples of just straight up no extra hoops to go through, counter target spell in red for 2 mana, which is a solid rate. The downside is your opponent that you counter is always going to get another spell out of it. There is an element of randomness, though, because it's not like the top spell in their library. It's not even like the top 1, 2, or 3. Like, some amount's going to be exiled, but they're going to get something out of it. But the idea with this card, and the reason why I think we rate it so highly, is, first of all, it's a red counter spell, which is, I think in red, it's, if it was in blue, I don't think it would make the list, right? Like, it wouldn't make the list if it was just like a mono blue card. But because it's in red and there's so few options in that, the stonks go way up. So we're talking about red cards here. And the other thing is that you're basically trading a card that you really didn't want them to resolve for a card, for any other card, basically. It could hypothetically be an even worse spell, but chances are if you spent the mana and the card to counter something, that thing, whatever the thing you cascade into or whatever, is going to be worse. Just 9 times out of 10. That's what makes Tybalt's Trickery so good. I hate it because I'm always going to hit the better card, because that's my luck in life. That's the same with Chaos Warp. That's just how Magic the Gathering gods smile upon me. But I can acknowledge that this is just a very good card that is like exceptionally good in red. But what do you guys?
It's Chaos Warp, the Counterspell edition, essentially. And I play this card in every red deck. Like you said, if it was a blue card, it wouldn't be a good card. So if you're playing blue, it's not a good card. If you have access to counters that are not going to give your opponent something, but just like Chaos Warp, sure, it's painful that you have to give your opponent something back to remove their thing. But if you're playing a red deck that can't deal with enchantments or can't deal with artifacts, having the option to do that makes it worth the risk. And that's where I'm at with Tibalt's Trickery. I play this in every mono red deck, and I think it is very much worth it. You do want to be aware of what you're firing it off on, of course. Like, you don't want to use it to counter some middling thing early in the game because it could be disastrous. But if you're using it to stop your opponent's best spell, kind of like you said with an offer you can't refuse, I'm using it to stop my opponent's best spell. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? Even if they somehow get incredibly lucky and spin into their second best spell, well, I still technically came out somewhat ahead compared to having their best spell resolve. So considering red just doesn't get stack interaction on this level, I think it's totally worth it because of its uniqueness. But what about you, Krim? Where are you at with this one?
Funny enough, this card is sweet in that, like, also if somebody tries to counter your, let's say I dove and veto your spell, you could then cast this on your own spell so that at least you get something out of it. It's like, then you get to try to, like, do the fancy, right? Like, you gotta do the fancy. This card is fun. This is also just a really funny counterspell that's pure chaos, so naturally I would love it. But, like, I think this card is just, it's like, people aren't going to play around it in red, right? They're not, like, most times people don't think about the counterspell coming out of the red deck. They joke about it. Everybody jokes about it. But even if you acknowledge its existence, you still don't play around. And that really does lead to some lines where this card will just straight up blow out the person, right? Like, we're talking like they okay, well, this is my one of win condition that I've been waiting to deploy. This is my ace. And they're not going to think about it because you're in red, so you get them. And that on its own is good.
Yeah, like, kind of like Mana Tithe, which didn't make our top 10 list, but the same sort of way that, like, people don't play around a counter if you're a mono white deck because they just don't expect it. People aren't going to play around Tibalt's Trickery because they don't associate red with counters. If you're playing a blue deck, they're going to definitely keep in mind the possibility of counters, but that makes it even more valuable for sure. So, yeah, if you're playing a mono red deck, play Tibalt's Trickery. Let's move on to number 3 on our list. Krim, I think you're up with this one, and that's probably good because I know you're very high. I think the highest on this card out of all of us. What do we got at number 3?
It's Arcane Denial. Counter target spell, and then, of course, if at the beginning... Okay, hold on. At the beginning of the next upkeep, the controller of the spell draws 2, and then you draw 1. This is an S. I think this is probably the first S we've talked about, actually. Because if people play counterspells, why? Why do you literally play counterspell? Like the literal card counterspell. This card is easier to cast. It draws you a card. You don't care if you draw your opponent cards because you've now countered their best card. And it's potentially a way for you to politic so that you don't maybe the person doesn't get upset because you gave them cards. It's the illusion that they got, like, they still get to draw cards, and then that on its own makes it not feel as bad, right? So you won't draw their ire. On top of that, the biggest thing is that you yourself replace the card. That's what I care about because I'm putting it essentially a game of chicken that whatever 2 cards you drew aren't going to be better than what I'm countering. And on top of that, if I'm refilling my cards, I'm now able to continue to be more annoying and do more nonsense stuff. And since you're drawing 2 on the next upkeep, that's way different because that's not your turn. So that means you've got to wait a full cycle to do that all over, and then that gives me a full cycle to untap and prepare for you. So I love that. I love this. And it's good in every kind of deck. It's good in aggro. It's good in, like, because it's a way for you to protect your board, refill your hand. It's good in control, draw, go. Like, it goes in anything because it's so easy to cast.
This is our most controversial one, too, because Seth gave it, or Krim gave it an S. I gave it an A, so I'm very high on it, too. But Seth is, like, incredibly low on it with a C. So we have the rating between S and C, from the highest to the lowest. So Seth, why do you hate this card so much?
To me, the math just doesn't check out. If you think about resolving this card, so your opponent casts a spell, you Arcane Denial it. You're both -1 cards, essentially. So if you use a counterspell, literal counterspell to stop something, you're down a card, your opponent's down a card. If you use Arcane Denial to stop something, you spend your Arcane Denial and draw back 1 card, so you're card neutral. Your opponent gets their spell countered, but then they draw 2 cards, so they're technically +1 card. Like, the math doesn't check out. Like,
so
why
glad.
wouldn't you just... why wouldn't you use an actual counterspell?
I'm so glad you brought that up.
You're thinking of it in 1v1 terms where card advantage matters, right? Like, in 1v1, card advantage matters a lot, right? But
that's why I never played the one on the Rick Stick study.
That's not what I would say. That's not what I would say. Okay,
the quality of cards that you draw is what matters, right? And if you counter the highest quality thing, and if you know your deck is a control deck and you're all answers, I'm okay with with this.
No, but my comparison is to like a literal counterspell. Like in that okay, go ahead, Tomer. Let me hear your argument.
It's card advantage. It is actually card advantage because I agree with Krim. It's very different from a 1v1 because in 1v1, counterspell is I trade my counterspell for your spell, so it's a 1-for-1. Arcane Denial in 1v1 is a 2-for-1 for your opponents because your opponents. You trade your Arcane Denial for their spell, so it's 1-for-1, but then your opponent goes up 2 cards, and you go up 1 card, so net, they're going up 1 card compared to you, which is bad in 1v1. However, we have in Commander 2 more opponents. So again, let's do the math again. If we're doing a counter spell for your spell, me and you go down 1, but our opponents go down 0. So we're both down, I'm down 1 card, or I'm down even on you. I'm even on you, but I'm down 2 cards relative to the entire rest of the table. Arcane Denial, though, I'm down 1 card instead of 2 cards because my opponent got 2 cards. I got back 1 card, and my 2 opponents who weren't in this thing are still netting 0. So if you look at it in a 4-player game, relative to the rest of the table, Arcane Denial is you're down 1 card, as opposed to Counterspell, a 1-for-1, which you're actually down -2 because you have to factor in the other 2 opponents. If that makes sense. I don't know if I explained it properly.
I think I see what you're saying, but wouldn't it be like, so you Arcane Denial, you essentially end up at 0, right? You spend a card, but you get that card back. So you're card neutral.
Your card neutral.
You have 2 other opponents that are at 0 because they weren't even involved in the counter battle. Mm-hmm. And then you have another opponent that's +1. Isn't that still bad math for you? 0, 0, 0, +1. Isn't that good for the person you countered because they're +1 and everyone else is at 0?
They benefit the most, but you go down the least compared to a counterspell.
So compared to Counterspell, you would be -1, one opponent would be -1, and the other 2 are at 0. So I guess that makes sense. I can see that argument.
Like this, Seth. You and I, we always duke it out right on the pod, and then Richard comes in out of nowhere and wins. Why? Because we've used all of our resources on each other. And Richard's done nothing. Right? So he's quietly benefited from the fact that I've answered your stuff, or vice versa, right? We go back and forth. That's why, though, right? And this card helps us get around that because though Richard has chosen, I think you could think of it as like Richard didn't spend any cards, but realistically, us going down cards is bad, right? Against the 2 other people. So that's why
2 bystanders benefit from the counter spell or the removal spell or whatever.
Right. All we've done is help the 2 other players. Right?
Maybe a C. Maybe a C is too harsh. I could see. I can't get behind the S logic because you're still like giving the benefit to the person who you're countering.
But are you really Are they really benefiting that much if like they play their Ether Flux Reservoir, right? You just countered that. That is whatever win con they have. You countered their best win condition. Not only that. Now they're going to draw 2 cards, but in the game of Commander, they can draw whatever. It doesn't matter because you're assuming that the card quality in your deck is far greater than the card quality of the opposing deck. And because if your deck is all answers and all of that, then the chances are I'm now going to probably just draw another answer to whatever you drew into. So, I don't know. I like the idea that this is the only counterspell where I don't feel like I lose, one of the few where I don't feel like I lose cards.
I mean, that is true. Like, by definition, it is one of the only counter spells, especially cheap ones. There's expensive ones, but it is one of the only cheap counter spells where you don't end up down a card. So, I think
what's the hardest thing in Commander? You've got 4 players. You can't be, and why don't I like, Force of Will? Because you can't be going down cards in a multiplayer game.
Okay, I can get behind C being too low of a grade. I can bump it up to a B. I can bump it up to a B. I'll go that far. And Tomer's argument does make, like, the math on that argument does make sense to me. So I can definitely see what you're saying there. I still don't like that you end up benefiting the person you're countering, though. Like, even though you got 2 other opponents in the mix that, like, makes the math better, it still is awkward to me that you would give someone an extra card for the joy of countering their spell.
I actually like it because Commander, whether we like it or not, for me, it hurts me more often than not. It's a game of politics more often than not. It's less about the power of each individual deck and more of how you can navigate a pod. And Arcane Denial kind of removes the feel bad. Well, it keeps a little bit of the feel bad of the counter magic, but I think it takes a lot of the sting away from, like, oh, why are you targeting me? You're selecting me and removing my spell. But this one was like, you got 2 cards, so it does take out the sting. I noticed people react to a little of it. They're a little bit more the reaction I noticed when I cast Arcane Denial is much more neutral. As opposed to
I never
upset.
see anybody like upset. They're just like, dang it.
Yeah, dang it. I wanted that spell to resolve, but at least I got 2 cards. So I do like it. I like that it's non-conditional. It gets any spell, so you can hit creatures or whatever. It's 2 mana, so like it's more than one.
It's also 1 in a blue. Not 2
1 in a blue. So it's easily splashable too. It's not double blue like Counterspell, so it's easily splashable. It used to be like my favorite budget counter magic ever, but now I notice like it's been printed like a billion times, and the cheapest copy is $4. So it's like people like it in casual. People really like it in casual, which is making my job a little bit harder. I run it a little bit less now in budget brews, but I like it. It's one of my favorites.
I think as far as actual just like EDH rec, it's one of the most played counter spells. Like, I think it's actually number 3, which budget is probably part of it because literal counter spells number 1, and that's like dirt cheap and like whatever, classic. But it actually is one of the most popular ones. And I will testify to what you're saying is true. Like, it doesn't hurt too much to be countered by this, although I think that would also be an argument that maybe it's not that good. Like, if you're countering someone's thing and they're like, hooray, are you actually like disrupting them, or are you like group hugging them to death?
I think it's more psychological. Like, if I'm countering your best thing, you get to draw 2 cards, but I really don't care about the 2 random cards over the thing that I actually wanted to remove. Like, I think counter spells, like, you don't want to fire them off blind. They are like your lifesavers in your deck, and you want to use it only if you are forced to. Like, your opponent is going to get an insurmountable advantage, or you're going to lose an insurmountable advantage. And so, like, I don't care about you drawing up random cards, like 2 cards, nothing. If you drew like 20 cards or something, I'd be, okay.
Because you're only spending it on something that's worth more than those cards anyway, basically. Like, you're not going to fire it off on a medium target.
Yeah, and it has to be a threat to me. Like, if you're threatening somebody else on the table, I don't care. So yeah, I don't know.
Let's move on to number 2 on our list, and my most hated card on the list because it shouldn't exist and it's a horrible card, but it is very powerful and it is one of the best counters, and it is Fierce Guardianship, the Commander 2020 free spell. 3 mana instant, except it's free if you have your commander. Counter target non-creature spell. This one's ranked really highly across the board. S and S from Tomer and Krim. I gave it an A, which is probably mostly my biases of just like hating this card because it's such a force staple for Commander that was like designed to be really good in Commander. Literally a force staple. But it is undoubtedly very, very powerful. Like, it is one of the best ways to protect your Commander. It does a lot of what Force of Negation does. Everything that Force of Negation does, and more, assuming you have your Commander on the battlefield. Plus, it's only 3 mana to cast, which again isn't a great rate, but not a force of will rate of just like, oh my god, this is unreasonable, I'm never going to hardcast this. So my question for you for this one is, what deck would you not play this in? Like, is it like monocolor to 5-color? Is there any deck that, discounting budget, because it is ridiculously expensive at this point, but assuming budget's not a concern, is there any reason to not play this card in literally every single deck?
There's like, no. I could name a
outside
handful.
of budget. Outside of budget, right?
Right. Discounting budget.
Why would you not play this?
Hear me out. Dragon.
Okay.
9 mana
yeah,
Commander.
That's expensive. That is expensive.
Very hard to pass. Yeah. Like I will count, like, if we have a 10-turn game, I will have Dragon out for 1 turn probably, and he's usually going to either win me the game the turn I cast him, or he's going to get blown up, and then I just continue using the Eminence. Or like,
but then Eminence makes it so you don't want the Commander out. So it's actually okay. So it's actively bad to like lose your Eminence.
That's like the only Commander I know that like I want to cast my Commander. So
counterpoint though, like, you want to make it to combat with the Dragon so you can get its trigger and like draw a bunch of cards. And this is like my 9 mana Commander. I can cast it and still have this free protection spell up to make sure I make it to combat if someone has a swords or something. So even in that context,
still
like, I can see your argument, but I don't think it's like horrible in a Dragon deck even.
Yeah. You would have to, if you have a deck that you rarely have your Commander ever, like you could go through games without having your Commander on the battlefield, then don't run Fierce Guardianship, I guess. But if you ever cast your Commander in the format called Commander, which is like 99.9999% of decks, this card is just busted. Oh, by the way, it's the same. We got the same ranking as number 1 and number 2. So this is like shares the title of number 1.
Oh, yeah, co number 1 on our list technically. Tomer, now that you mention it, what is number 1 on our list?
It's your boy Mana Drain. This used to be a drawback back in the day when it was first printed. So it's not like it was made to be a format also or anything. There was something called Mana Burn, and this could get you 2 in blue, instant, counter target spell. At the beginning of your next main phase, add an amount of colorless equal to that spell's mana value. So if you counter a 5 mana value spell on your next main phase, the beginning of your next main phase, you get 5 colorless mana to spend with. So this is a counterspell plus. It's a counterspell that also ramps you. It's non-selective or anything, it's unconditional, so you can counter literally anything. It's double blue, and then it ramps you. It's the only counterspell that we talked about here. There's a couple others that ramp you, but this is easily the best of the best. In terms of ramping you out, and it doubles as that. Like this is the only counterspell that I would be like, yeah, I'm going to just fire it off at the next 5 mana spell if I really want to have an explosive turn. The other ones, no, and the other ones I will hold on to dear life, and you have to pry it out of my cold dead hands. Well, my hot alive hands, actually, because I'm going to use it to save myself from certain doom. This one, I'll just be like, oh, you cast your Dragon? Blah, 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 9 mana, next turn, nom, 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 nom. So yeah, this card is gas. I actually ranked it lower, though. So I gave it an A. Seth and Krim gave it S's, so this is just switched around. Instead of me giving an S, Seth gave it an S. And I think it's a little bit worse than Fierce Guardianship because this is double blow. You have to keep 2 mana up, which is more than 0. So that's a big thing. I value countering instant sorceries over everything. So Fierce Guardianship ticked that box for me. And while the ramp is really nice, I don't know. It's double blue. Like, can you even run this in like a 4-color deck, a 5-color deck? Would you, Seth?
Oh yeah. A lot of decks I play, like 4 and 5-color decks, I play a single counter, and that single counter, assuming it's not a budget week or something, it's Mana Drain. Like, Mana Drain is counterspell but it's like counterspell, roll a d20. If you roll like a 15 or higher, you like win the game. Like it's got this like ridiculous ceiling where sometimes you just counter this expensive spell and that mana lets you do this huge thing and you just win the game because you cast a literal counterspell with this huge upside. So for me, that the ceiling is so high and the floor, like, I had actual OG Counterspells a B. Like, I don't think actual OG Counterspells like a horrible card. Like, there's a ton of other options now, so it's not on our top 10 list. But its floor is like a passable card. And then its ceiling is one of the most busted cards that has ever been printed, like, in the history of the game. So for me, I jam it in. It's my one Counterspell in every deck possible. But what about you, Krim? Where are you at? Do you not run this in any decks? Discounting budget again?
We're talking about Mana Drain?
Yeah. Are there any decks it doesn't make?
I don't even know what deck I wouldn't play this in.
Yeah.
Would you run 5 color decks just like full send no matter what?
Yeah, of course. This is S.
Dang.
Dude,
all right.
It's not even a counter spell. It shouldn't even be on this. It's a ramp spell.
That's fair.
Okay.
But it doubles.
Okay. It's amazing. This is such for like the ability to trade 2 mana for potentially 6 is unbelievable. Right? Like this is one like that game where I countered a spell on turn 2 just to counter it, right? On turn to someone's 3-drop. I think it was actually your 3-drop. I don't remember. And then I just went right into Scarab God, right? Like that was so good. And so like the ability to just counter at any point. If you counter early, you're now, like, you counter a 3-drop, you're at the 5-drop spot, right? You counter in the late game, next turn you've got some big spells you can play. And yeah, this is just the spell. This is the counter spell. And thankfully, now that it's been reprinted a ton, it's cheaper. It's still expensive, but it's cheaper than where it was.
The cheapest option is $37.
That's...
I'm holding out hope that Commander Masters, that we get both. Actually, both of our top 2 seem like really obvious choices. So I'm hoping that maybe this summer we'll get cheaper mana drains and Fierce Guardianships, at least for a little bit. So anyway, that's our top 10 list. So I'm curious if you're watching this someplace where there's comments. Let us know what you disagree with, agree with. I'm curious what y'all think. But before we wrap things up today, we want to share. Oh, sorry. Do you have something else, Tomer, before we go to our honorable mentions?
Yeah, honorable mentions time.
Yeah, but before we wrap things up, we want to share a couple of our favorite counter spells. These ones didn't make our top 10 list, but they're ones that we personally like for some reason. So, Tomer, why don't you kick us off with your first honorable mention?
All right. So this is a card that is relatively recent. I have to double check the year it came out. It was 2 years ago. And there's very little chatter about it, but it's Decisive Denial. It's a green and a blue, so it's a Simic card. And it's a modal counterspell. You choose one. Either target creature you control fights target creature you don't control, or counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 3. So like I said, I highly value my counter magic, primarily to stop instants and sorceries, and I'll use permanents and I'll use like other spells to get rid of permanents to fill in the gaps. And this does both for 2 mana. So it either will stop an instant or sorcery or basically any non-creature spell. So even artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, it can hit all those things too. And then guess what? It also can actually deal with the creatures, which is the one thing it can't counter. If you are a creature-heavy deck in Simic, and since you're in green, I'm going to just assume you are a creature-heavy deck, like anything with like 4 power creatures or greater, you can snipe your opponent's best creatures as well, like threatening creatures. So it's either creature removal or non-creature counter, which I value the second mode more than the first mode, obviously, but having both modes is just awesome. I think this card is heavily slept on. And it's 14 cents. 14 cents? What's going on? Am I crazy?
It's actually hilarious because I was looking at our honorable mentions list, and Krim, you almost picked the exact same card, but in different colors. Like your first honorable mention is like very similar, right?
Yes, but Drown in the Loch. So I chose Drown in the Loch because I can actually just kill it, right? Like it is. I know that fighting, you do have the best creatures, but it does kind of require you to have the creature and also have it be stronger than whatever you're trying to remove. This one, I just straight up can remove it right then and there, as long as you have the cards in your yard and sort of body in mind.
Oh my
pretty
god!
much makes that.
Boo.
Oh, what?
We need a counter like days without mentioning Sword of Body.
Yeah.
Yo, like I'm just
And it's
saying,
perpetually
though,
at 0.
Drown in the Loch is
Well, read the card. Read the card.
Drown in the Loch is I can either A, counter target spell, as long as its mana value is equal to the number of or equal to or less than the number of cards in that player's graveyard. And then it has a second mode. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the removal side where you can destroy a creature where its mana value is equal to or less than the number of cards in their graveyard. So, it's the most Demiri way to go about it, and I absolutely love it. It's a hard counter. It's versatile. It can be a counterspell. It can be removal. So, much like why Tomer likes Decisive Denial. But that's in Simic, and we just, it's... I like that I can hard counter you as opposed to have to pay 3. I like that I can just straight up kill your thing and not need creatures for it, assuming that your yard is loaded up.
I mean, I guess I'll share my first honorable mention too, because it kind of fits the same motif, but it's way more expensive, and that's Sublime Epiphany. Sublime Epiphany, it's 6 mana, so it's a ridiculous amount of mana, but you get to choose one or more of counter a spell, counter an activated or triggered ability, bounce a non-land permanent, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control or target player draws a card. So it's a very, very expensive effect, but it's, if you can resolve it, it's very powerful. It's like a 3 or 4 for 1, where you're copying the best creature on the battlefield, you're able to bounce something, you're drawing cards, you're countering something. So I think the TLDR of this is we all like counters that do additional things. Like, counters that are just counters are great, but counters that can also kill a creature or like copy something, they go way, way up in value, because as great as counters are in the ability to stop anything on the stack is one of the most powerful things you can do in a game of Magic. There's also times when a counterspell isn't doing much and kind of stuck in your hand, and you're tapped out and they slip a big threat through, and your counterspell's not going to do anything to stop that threat from attacking you. But if you have a Decisive Denial, or if you have a Drown in the Loch, or you have a 1,000,000 mana and Sublime Epiphany, these are counters that can actually get you out of those situations. So I think these are actually all really good picks. I think they all have downsides. Sublime Epiphany, it's 6 mana. That's going to keep it off of our top 10 list, probably. Drown in the Loch, you do got to be playing sort of Body and Mind to have it really be fully powered. Cards will naturally go in the graveyard, so you can stop, cheap stuff naturally from fetch lands and stuff dying. And then Decisive Denial, it is a counter that is a mana leak, essentially, right? It's counter it unless they pay 3, so there's going to be times in the late game where maybe, similar to Spell Pierce, you really want to stop the Wrath, but your opponent's got 10 mana and they can just pay for it. So there's downsides to all of them, but I think all these cards are deserving of more play, probably. I think they're all really solid options, and if you're building your deck and you can sneak in counter spells that do more than just counter a spell, you're going to get a lot of power out of those, especially if they're relatively inexpensive, like Drown in the Loch and Decisive Denial. Tomer,
flexibility is key.
Yeah, do you have any more sleeper picks, favorites?
Okay, so we already talked about this one, but An Offer You Cannot Refuse was my second pick. But then we kind of talked about it during Swan Song. So I have another one. This card I don't play that much because I was running low on other counterspells that I actually run. But it is kind of sweet in mono blue decks, I think. This is Archmage's Charm. It's triple blue, so 3 blue pips. For another modal spell, we love our modals, counter target spell, target player draws 2 cards, or gain control of target non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. Now, I don't actually run this card that much, but if I am in mono blue and I do want more counter magic, then this is the one that I generally go for. 3 mana to counter target spell, not a good rate. 3 mana to draw 2 cards, but... then the final one seems kind of useless, but keep in mind the most played card in Commander is Sol Ring. So it's 3 mana, just instant speed, steal somebody's Sol Ring, put it onto your side of the battlefield. Putting all 3 of these together makes it much better, the sum is greater than the parts, or whatever. You know the thing. And I think this is a worthy inclusion in blue-heavy draw-go style decks, where like, yeah, sometimes you want to have the counterspell, but sometimes you're low on cards, so you want to draw some cards, and then sometimes somebody plays an early swallowing and you're like, yoink. So the fact that it's good early, middle, and late game is what really, really sets it apart, I think.
Archmage Charm is really good. The only drawback is triple blue. Like you said, you kind of got to be mono blue to cast it consistently. That's the one big drawback. I think the other big upside to this that you didn't really touch on is we've seen some Commander Clash games where Crim, like, you know, he's got the counter up and it goes all the way around the table and it gets to the person before his turn. And it's like, well, I might as well counter something because I left all my mana up. Archmage's Charm, worst case, you do that, you draw a couple cards, or you snag someone's Soul Ring. Like, the cost of counterspells is leaving mana up, with the risk being that maybe there's nothing you end up needing to counter, and if you don't spend that counterspell, you kind of just wasted that mana. That's a tempo loss and efficiency loss that never has to happen with Archmage's Charm, because worst case, it's an instant speed divination. So if it goes all the way around the table and there's nothing to counter, well, just draw a couple cards with it. So I think if this was easier to cast, I think it might make the top 10 list. Like, honestly, like, the big issue is it's just like, yeah, you gotta be mono blue. What do you think about this one, Grim?
I love the card. I mean, that's one of the things. I love that card. I think it's extremely powerful because of, like, it's able to steal so many mana rocks or I mean, not mana rocks, but like soul rings and, like, you know, things like that.
Mana dorks.
Common, yeah, mana dorks or even like whatever, the Ascendant.
Esper Sentinel, Sarah Ascendant.
I've seen also Constructs, which is very cute.
Yeah,
like if you're like in an artifact deck and you have the triple blue, like, well, some of these constructs are pretty big.
That theft effect is huge, and yeah, like, I love it just for those exact reasons that you had mentioned, Seth. You can just, at the end of the turn, I can just draw 2 if I don't have to do anything. So it's a good card. Just problem is it's triple blue.
Hard to cast, yeah. Well, what do you got for your last honorable mention, Krim?
Well, so on Commander Clash, I don't get to play them a lot because we usually have themes or something to it. But in paper, I play Urtai Resurrected a decent amount. It's 2 blue-black. And it's a 3/2 with flash. And then when it enters the battlefield, you get to either A, counter a spell or ability, the opponent or the owner of that spell or ability draws a card. And then you also have the second mode, which is destroy target creature or planeswalker. Its controller draws a card. So this is a 4-mana 3/2 flash body. So along the lines of what Venser is doing. But the difference here is that this will kill anything. Not bounce, it kills anything. Or, of course, it counters anything. It stifles. It kind of does a little bit of everything. And it gives you a body on top of that. Now, more often than not, I'm able to, like, you know, drawing a card with this, not that hard if you play, like, Narsets, Notion Thieves, and things like that, right? Because then it's like, either A, they don't draw it, or... then on top of that, there's also the fact that, let's just say, without the assist of those other cards, I'm okay with you drawing that card. You know I like Arcane Denial, so you know I'm okay with you drawing your card if it means that I stop what I perceive as a threat to my game plan. So, yeah, like, I love this. I think this card does everything, and it gives me a body, which is relevant when you can flicker it. I think a while back we did a budget theme deck, and he was my commander, and I was playing ghostly flickers, and I was just bouncing his
flickering.
Yeah,
wears a sort of body in mind pretty well. Just saying.
That's the one card that I think isn't good in this deck because you're flickering your stuff all the time. So maybe that's where we don't want that. But legitimately, I just think that this is a powerful card, and because it's on a body, that makes it actually better than you would think. Example gets around swan songs and negates and things like that, right? Dovin's vetoes. So like, yeah, it actually is pretty huge because of that.
It's just so flexible. And it's so flexible. Like, counter anything, stifle anything, or kill anything. Like, that's a lot of text for 4 mana with flash. So yeah, I think it's pretty good, especially if you're a Arcane Denial believer where the card isn't something that intimidates you. Like, it's just a really flexible spell, and there is that huge upside of having a body that you can blink and flicker it. Did you win the Commander Clash game, or did you really annoy people and then they killed you? I imagine it went one of those two ways, I would assume.
I don't remember, actually. I think you were annoyed the table too much.
I think Tomer... I think Tomer ended up winning because you like hit me for like 1,000 or something out of nowhere, Seth. And then I was like, and I was like, if you hit me for like 40, I'm not going to use my luck.
That was the whole week. Yes.
That's right. There was like some weird spite thing going on because I attacked you. That's right. I remember that now.
No, you didn't attack me. You dealt like 36 damage to me. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't like it was like a little haircut, a little off the top.
I was giving a little layup there. I was like, all right, I guess I'll win.
Because I had Tomer just like locked because I had locked your serpent.
Exiling my stuff too. Jeez, that was a good game.
All right, my last honorable mention.
Bring it home.
We couldn't go through this whole cast without mentioning this card, Mana Tithe. I love Mana Tithe. Like, it's come up a couple times throughout the cast. Like, being mono, 1 mana, 1 white mana, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. So essentially, Jwari Disruption, but it's white. Or also compares a little bit to Tibalt Trickery with the surprise factor. I just love getting people with the card. It is probably my favorite card in all of Magic to actually get someone with. No one expects a counter spell out of a mono white deck. It's also just like Jwari Disruption, like the softest possible counter. So you have that whole thing like, if I had paid 1 less mana for my, Genesis Wave, it would actually resolve. But no, I had to just be too greedy and put it all in there. So you get that psychological damage. And I actually think it's a pretty good card. I will say every time that I've played Mana Tithe, I've ended up being able to cast it and actually get value out of it. Like, it seems like the kind of card that gets stuck in your hand, but people tend to tap out quite a bit in a game of Commander, and no one's really not doing it because they're afraid of Mana Tithe, even though maybe they should be. So I actually think it's a lot better than you probably think it is. Like, it is a meme card to some extent because it's really funny, but at the same time, there's been a lot of games where you've countered a 8 mana spell with it, a 10 mana spell with it, and it actually does kind of like swing the game. I remember one, I think it was a Torment of Hailfire that Richard or someone tapped out for, and it was like a 14 mana spell, and then the Mana Tithe comes through for 1 mana and just like gets it by surprise. So I put it in all my white decks. Again, if you're in blue, it loses a lot of value because people play around counters when they see blue mana open. But if you're mono white and don't have any blue mana, I actually like unironically think it's a pretty good card, and it's a hilarious card to get people with.
I think this is your signature card, but So I was definitely, I also jammed Mana Tithe a lot back in the day, and back in the day is like a couple of years ago. I think the one thing that has been pushed it out of basically all my white decks is how good white is now at protecting their board. So we got Teferi's Protection, we got Clever Concealment, we got Flawless Maneuver, Guardian Knight or whatever, the one that phases out. Like, when I want counter magic in white, it's primarily, again, just broken record, but it's like instant sorceries that are going to like wipe my board and stuff. And those end up being just more efficient than Mana Tithe, or at least more consistent. So I actually replaced Mana Tithe with those cards over time. And I don't know if that's like the same with you, Seth, or you still run it.
So I think you're correct in that optimally, I think you're doing the right thing. Yeah. I love Mana Tithe so much, and I just love the feeling of countering someone with Mana Tithe so much that I still played in all my white decks. And I will say I play it a little different than most counter spells. We talked a bunch of times through the cast about like save your Arcane Denial for the game-winning spell, save your counter for the game-winning spell. When I play Mana Tithe, I am looking for any opportunity to spell that's like 4+ mana. I don't really care what it is. I'm just gonna fire it off if I know it's gonna work, and just kind of like laugh in your face and be like, I gotcha. So that's my Mana Tithe technique. So optimally, you're 100% right. I probably should cut it, but I love that feeling too much to do that with. Yeah.
Well, that's
I probably should play I probably should play that one more honestly, but
if you're trying to do a gotcha, nothing feels more like a gotcha.
Hypothetical. Let's say you go first. You play a land to planes or whatever, and you pass a turn, and then I go land Soul Ring. Are you gonna fire off the Mana Tithe?
I would actually stop a Soul Ring. If it was turn 2 and it was like your Arcane Signet, I probably wouldn't. But the Soul Ring is too good to pass up. Yeah,
I think you would be the hero at the table if you Mana Tithe the turn 1 Soul Ring. I think people would give you a grace period. I think.
I think they probably would, hopefully. But anyway, that's our top 10 counterspells and our favorite counterspells all wrapped into one podcast. So, like we said before, let us know, what's your favorite counter? What do you think of the top 10 list? Let us know in the comments. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the cast this week. And Richard will be back next week. We got a pretty fun topic we're working on, so make sure to come back for that one and like and subscribe and do all that good stuff. Check out Card Conduit if you need to sell some cards. So thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. And this is a crew signing out.